Hey folks, welcome to the Ramble. For this video, I want to speak primarily to my fellow white people, for a change. And I want to talk about something some of us are still holding on to that we should have let go of a long time ago. And that something is the N-word. The first thing I want to make clear here is that my own thinking has changed on this subject quite a bit over the years. My position has changed within the last year or so, in fact. So I'm not trying to preach at you here. I am certainly not without sin, so to speak. I just want to share with you my own experience and suggest that if you are a white person who still thinks it's ever okay for you to say the N-word, maybe you should reconsider. Where I live, there's a majority white population and a lot of casual racism. Mostly that's evident in people's behaviors and attitudes and assumptions. Occasionally, you can hear it in the language, too. The N-word has passed through the lips of almost everyone I've ever known from this area. I'm talking about friends, family, fellow students, co-workers. I'm ashamed to say I've said that word myself far, far, far too many times. When I was younger, I said it the same way most of the people around me said it, and I didn't think anything of it. When I got older and my thinking on racism started to change, I stopped saying it that way. I stopped saying it as a synonym for a black person. I stopped saying it with the intention to insult and degrade. But I didn't stop saying it. I held on to it. I told myself, well, obviously I shouldn't say it with malice and I shouldn't use it in my casual speech. But if I'm quoting someone or singing along to a song, or having a discussion about racism where that word comes up, I think I should say it. Because, after all, we're all grown-ups here, and how are we going to talk about the word if we're not even letting ourselves say the word? And if we can't talk about these issues, how will anything ever get any better? I had all kinds of very reasonable-sounding rationalizations for why it was okay for me as a white person to say the N-word in certain circumstances. I've even said it in videos on this channel, most recently about a year ago when I put up a video titled "Speaking Up Against Bigotry is Hard, but It's Worth It," where I tell two personal anecdotes. One about a time when someone said something racist in my presence and I let it slide. Another about a later time where someone said something racist in my presence and I called them out on it. The point being, don't let that kind of thing slide. Speak up. Let people know that you won't just sit quietly while they spout racism. And in the course of telling those stories, I pronounced the N-word several times. I put a content advisory at the beginning of the video explaining why I felt I needed to say it, and then I said it. And I wasn't super comfortable with it even then, because my feelings on the subject were starting to change. But ultimately, I felt justified in saying it, and I said it, and I posted the video. After the video went up, I got a comment that is now the pinned comment on that video if you want to go look at it for yourself, but I'll share a little bit of it with you right now. As a gay black man, I often have to have these awkward conversations among my peers who happen to be straight, white, male, or any combination of privileged identities at often great risk to my social and economic standing. However, I'm actually going to take you up on this advice and ask you why you thought it was a requirement to utter the N-word in your storytelling. I see the usage of pejoratives by well-meaning liberals in a lot of these conversations, and I can't help feel that some truly don't care for the feelings of the minorities they desperately want to defend. I am of the line of thought that saying the N-word is sufficient in any setting to get a grasp of the conversational context. I'm sure I and your audience would have known exactly what these individuals said if you did not use it yourself. I know to you this argument just seems like simple semantics, but as I'm sure you're aware, the enunciation of the word has a lot of baggage. And as a black man who has gotten somewhat used to hearing it in these settings, my hairs still stand when I hear it being used by a white person who a bit arrogantly professes he needed to use it. I left a reply to that comment where I essentially just reiterated my reasoning for choosing to say the word, while acknowledging how hurtful it is for many black folks to hear that word, no matter what the intentions or the context in which it is being spoken. And I apologized, though I now see that my apology was undercut by my attempted explanation/excuse. Not all black folks object to white people ever saying the N-word. Some black folks are willing to tolerate it if it's said in a context they consider acceptable. But over the years, I've read and heard the opinions of many, many, many black folks who say flatly that no white person should ever say that word for any reason. And recurring throughout those opinions, sometimes explicitly, sometimes by implication, is the same question. It's the question that finally convinced me that I just shouldn't say that word for any reason ever again. Why are you holding on to this? That's the question I was being asked. That's the question I had to ask myself. And if you're a white person who objects to racism, who wants to be an ally to black people against racism, but you still feel entitled to say that word in some instances, and you haven't asked yourself that question, maybe you should. If you hate racism, if you hate what that word represents, if you hate the anger and pain and grief it evokes in black people when they hear that word, why are you still insisting you have a right to say it? What is it you're so unwilling to give up here? If you did decide for yourself that you were just never ever going to say that word again, what would you lose? There have been several times over the last few years where I've taken it upon myself to phase certain words out of my vocabulary. I stopped saying the misogynistic slur, the C word. I stopped saying the transphobic slur, the T word. I changed the title of one of my video series because the title contained a word which some friends very kindly and very patiently worked to convince me was ableist, and that it was a word I should just avoid using. These aren't major changes. In the grand scheme of things, they aren't important. When it comes right down to it, I'm nobody, and the words I choose to express myself with don't affect anyone other than people I know and those of you who are good enough to watch these videos. But they do affect you. Well, some of you, at any rate. And they do say something about me, whether I'm conscious of what they're saying or not. Just as the words you choose to use to express yourself say something about you, whether you're conscious of it or not. A lot of you are probably where I still was with this a year ago. It took a long time for me to get to this point, and it required a lot of patience and emotional labor from people close to me, non-white and white, plus a lot of very impassioned arguments from black voices, both people I know and also people I don't know who I just read or watched in the media, to finally convince me that the N-word is just a word that I, as a white person, should never ever say. I can be stubborn. I can be defensive. I can be self-absorbed. I can be too slow to change. But I also know that I can change. And if I can, you probably can too. You just have to decide that it's worth it to make the effort. That decision is ultimately up to you. All I can tell you is I've made that decision more than a few times now to try and change my speech or my behavior or my point of view, to try and be more sensitive, more open, more accepting, more responsible, more receptive, more conscientious. And it hasn't always been easy, and it hasn't always been comfortable, but not once have I ever regretted it. I decided I was wrong to feel entitled to say the N-word, and I decided I'm not going to say it anymore. Maybe, fellow white person, you'll have a think on this and you'll decide that it's still okay for you to say it sometimes. Nothing I can do about that. I felt compelled to share my experience on the subject. It seemed relevant in light of some recent events, but no one can make that decision for you but you. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks for watching.